I've done estate planning for close to 20 years. And this seminar is really the compilation of my experience, because I thought I did great wills and trusts, back in the late 90s and early 90s and things like that. But I've seen over the years that there's lawsuits, divorces, bankruptcies, all sorts of things have imploded plans so they didn't work properly. So this seminar is really how do you solve that? And that's also why I wrote the book. So I hope you really enjoy our seminar this morning. Protecting your estate and leaving a legacy. Ladies and gentlemen, these are perilous times in America, and no group is more affected than seniors, retirees, and yes, beneficiaries, right? Once you die, the beneficiaries are really susceptible. And these are based on actual statistical data. There are 100 million lawsuits filed in the US annually. We love to sue people. I mean, it's crazy. I was going to give you the stats on each state court, but over 100 million. So, I mean, how many people in this room know someone personally that was sued or have ever been sued yourself? Just raise your hand. I just want to see how many people know about this. Okay, there's a good number of you. And this has a huge impact on people. And guess what? I won't make you raise your hand on this next one. What about the divorce rate? How many people have been affected by that? I think all of us know someone that's been through divorce and guess what? That's also a lawsuit. So you can't really forget that. We've got one of the highest divorce rates in the world, and that affects estate plans. It blows them up all the time. What about long-term care? We're living longer, but not always better. We've got really good health care. The average cost for skilled nursing home care in the state of Washington is $86,400 a year. So that's over $7,000 a month. That sort of expense has caused more than 5 million families to file for bankruptcy. I didn't even talk about all the bankruptcies. There's more than 1 million bankruptcies filed every year. Now there's 42 million caregivers throughout the United States. These are paid professional caregivers. I live up in Kirkland. On my street, there's a family home, on the way driving. It's a lot of, there's the big and then there's the small. It's a huge industry. If you add the part-time and family, it's probably 62 million caregivers. A lot of people lose their home and can't cover the cost of long-term care. And then what about people fighting over your money when you die? It's been said you never know people till you die. Well, you ever heard about that? I mean, all of a sudden there's a death and then there's fighting and that in-law that you thought was a problem, sometimes it's not the kids, it's the in-laws saying, you should do this and do that. Countless lawsuits are filed. And then it's even worse now with LegalZoom and do-it-yourselfers. They don't even know what they're signing, whether it's legal and there aren't good will clauses to contest things and things like that. So it's a mess. And it's a tragedy when this happens to people. Think of the nightmare when someone goes through this personal tragedy. And when people come to me, they say, Steve, I never ever thought this could happen to who? To me. They didn't think it could happen, and it did. The really sad thing is most of this is completely preventable. So what I want to do today is talk about how do we avoid the perils of this first slide. In fact, if you're like most of our clients, they share these concerns. They want no government involvement, right? They want to be private as much as they can. No taxes or fees. We can love our country and our state, but not want to pay more than our fair share. Avoid going broke from nursing home costs, right? People don't want to outlast their money. They want to be free from creditors as well as predators, right? And I talked about the beneficiaries. Anyone here ever gotten an email to inherit a bunch of money in Nigeria? Yeah, and let's not talk about the Iraqi dinaris too much, although I did meet with one guy who said, Steve, if things go well, by the end of today, I'll be worth $500 million. I said, that's wonderful. Why don't we plan for the now and you come back to me when you're worth $500 million. He's never been back. Now, no family fights. I mean, what a tragedy. Most people want to pass on something positive rather than people at their throats, that sort of thing. And so that kind of leads me to the last slide here, or the last point. Most people want to pass on more than their checkbook. They want to pass on their love, their stories, their life legacy. So by a show of hands, do you share some of these goals? See if you're awake this morning. That's great, because we're going to talk about how do you accomplish these goals along with your own. How do we avoid the perils of the first slide? Well, it can happen, but mere knowledge isn't enough. Head knowledge won't do the trick. How many people here have ever tried to shed a few pounds? And how much did thinking about that cause you to lose? Nothing, right? But you can actually lose weight if you start exercising. And you don't have to get up at 4 in the morning like I do 3 times a week to row crew. You can just start walking, especially walk after dinner and maybe stop eating after 8 at night. Have some more fruits and vegetables. You can knock off the weight and keep it off. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's possible. The same can be said of estate planning. We can avoid the perils of that first slide and the kind of our perilous times. We can accomplish the goals of the second slide. But it doesn't happen by just thinking about it. So I got to move you from your head down to your heart. So I'm going to tell you stories about poor planning, things that happen to families and happen all the time in order to motivate you to do something about this very important topic. And by the way, if you're not trying to lose weight right now, there's lots of food in the bag, so go help yourself. So I'm Steve. I always have to tell people, even though it's in the newspaper and whatever, yes, I am an attorney. And yes, I'm an accredited veterans attorney. So I grew up in Eastern Washington, so I love the sunshiny days. I came to school over at Seattle Pacific University, majored in English and religion. So I wasn't all that practical. I went back to Princeton Seminary thinking I wanted to be a pastor or teacher. Now this was not the family business. My dad's a nuclear engineer, PhD and that sort of thing. So I worked in a couple churches, didn't really feel a sense of call to the ministry. Although I did meet my wife when I worked at a church at Wedgwood. You'll get to meet her later. So when I was in law school, I went to law school after seminary, I did a little of everything. Everyone works for the Attorney General office a little bit. I worked for a PI firm, writing packets on people's head, sore shoulders and injured neck, that sort of thing. I didn't want to go into that line of field. I prosecuted for the City of Federal Way, so I know still how to beat a speeding ticket. That's probably come in handy once or twice in life. But when I graduated from law school, where I got my first job was family law, divorces. I endured for about 2 years doing that. I actually never lost a trial. But it drove me crazy. My stomach was churning. I got called every Thanksgiving, where are my kids, blah, blah, every Christmas Eve. I finally had to go unlisted with my phone number. Not a fun practice. So I'll kind of tell you some personal things and then tell you how I got into estate planning. So I am married. It's been close to 24 years. So I just realized that's probably longer than most Seahawks have been alive. That's pretty good. We have 2 daughters. They're both 6'2", gorgeous gals. One is rowing crew at the University of Washington. And the other's a senior in high school with Juanita. And I'm not sure if she's going to go to SPU or UW or what all. So back to my practice. So when I was in the middle of a law firm down in Tacoma, my mother-in-law died, Grandma Glenna. So my wife's mom died, and a little bit about their family. So Frank was really a good dentist. He practiced 41 years, and his most famous patient was Paul Allen, who of course owns the Seahawks. Here's my 12. And he was a co-founder of Microsoft. So he was a really good practicing a dentist. And they were right there in Wedgwood, and that's just kind of north of Seattle. Glenna was a buyer for Nordstrom. She had a real estate license. They at one point had a condo in Sun Valley as well as Crystal Mountain. They were together. But when Glenna died, they were clueless. They had no idea how to conduct the probate and do the estate tax return. They didn't know how to retitle things. So I helped them. I knew that, I had the training, and during the process, now I knew that family, but I realized that I have the mind of an attorney and the heart of a pastor. I was able to help that family, so I left that firm and went to an exclusive estate planning firm. Decided I wanted to do this for a living. And then in 2000, I launched my own firm, and all we do is estate planning. And we're on 112th here, right next to the freeway, so if you just go north of downtown, our office is right there. So it's right by the Hidden Valley Ballpark. And since we're filming this today, if someone's just trying to get to Bell Square, you're on I-5. And once you cross the freeway going west, you just take the first right. That's 112th. And you just go past 10th and 12th. And don't speed, because there's a lot of, but we're right there, free parking, nice spot. So personally, I like to hike. I climbed Mount Rainier a couple of years ago when I turned 50. That was fun. And I row crew, not as well as my daughter, but I'm learning. Now, I learned years ago that it's hard for a solo practicing attorney to stay current in the law. So I joined the American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys. They're a national organization, so they're throughout the entire US, and they have an incredible educational department. I mentioned before that, when the law changes, there's conference calls, so I've got one coming up Monday on VA planning. I had one yesterday on Heard at Heckerling, which is an advanced tax symposium. So I don't have to read the code when the law changes. So when the Pension Protection Act came out, the law and the regulations in 2,000 pages, I didn't have to read that. I had the attorneys with the advanced taxation degrees. They would go and attend and summarize. We have conference calls. We have educational events, summits twice a year. They're based out of San Diego. So I get to go to San Diego every year for about 4 days. And then the spring summit may be in Boston. It's in Louisville this year. So when it's a good one, my wife will go. So to quantify this, the state bar, they require us, and I reported yesterday. That's interesting. It's always due in February. So you have to prove that you've done 15 hours of continuing education. And you report every 3 years. The Academy requires not 15 hours a year, but 36, more than double, all in the field of estate planning. They want a high bar, really well-educated people. And we've got attorneys in all sorts of states. Like one of the questions before, Mike asked, well, we've moved from state to state. I have clients that move to other states, right? Boeing is also back east. So I would call John Kuhn and say, hey, I have clients moving from here to your fine state. This is the planning they did. They probably just need to tweak and do new healthcare powers of attorney, et cetera. The rest of the plan should be sturdy. So when I do deeds, I can do deeds in all 50 states. You kind of get the benefit of really one of the largest estate planning firms in the country, 200 firms, et cetera. But you get to come meet with me and my staff. So you get, a boutique firm. And only 2 firms in the entire state of Washington are members of the Academy. How many here have heard of Money Magazine? Right? They're known for money tips. They did kind of a grand scheme. They did a top 20 list. And point 17, I think this was back in 07, they said you should get your referrals from the American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys. Why? Because we're in almost every state, really well-educated people. And we thought that was a nice feather in our cap. I want to thank you for coming out here this morning. I realize you could be other places, right? We're going to talk about important things like death and taxes. That's not always fun. Ben Franklin said, nothing in life is certain but death and taxes. But what I like is Will Rogers. He kind of went on to say, at least death doesn't get worse every time Congress meets. I think sometimes taxes do. That can be worse. So we're going to talk about death and taxes. We're going to talk about nursing home expenses and how that can blow up estate plans. Sometimes nothing's left for the next generation. Why families are torn apart, and like I said in the ad, why your estate plan may not work and you don't even know. So thank you. We're going to cover these. You've already taken the first step. You've come here. You're not procrastinating. And that is my next slide. The number one reason I find people don't plan is procrastination. Now, you've probably seen Les Mis. I like the musical. It's wonderful. There's a song about tomorrow. It's kind of yearning. Tomorrow never comes, right? Procrastination is putting off until tomorrow what we really ought to do today. So I said before, I'm going to tell you stories that I hope will motivate and you connect with your heart so that you'll want to do something about this important topic. I think the next big barrier is lack of knowledge. People don't know do they need a living will or a living trust? What's the truth about probate in Washington? But this is kind of tip of the iceberg stuff, right? I mean, you may spot a few issues up there, but there's a whole lot going on down below. If you read the slide, it says you don't even know what you don't know. Unless you're in the field of estate planning, how do you know if you need a springing power of attorney or an immediate power? Maybe some sort of a hybrid if you're married. Should your healthcare power, should you have different agents than for your financial power? Do you want to include gifting? Should you plan? I mean, I won't go on and on about that. You don't know these things. Now today, I'm going to give you a very good overview of all of your legal options in Washington. Now I can't make you all experts in 2 hours, but I can give you a good heads up, and then you'll know what you want to cover further when you come in and review your goals and your plan. So like the agenda said that you were given, we're going to talk about why most estate plans don't work. One commentator said traditional estate planning, which is avoidance of taxes and maybe probate, has done more harm than good. That's bold. We'll talk about the benefits of legacy wealth planning after our intermission. We'll identify the most important part of estate planning, and there will be times for questions and answers later. So again, write down your questions. We have too many people to take them during the seminar, and turn your phones to silent, which I did. And then the most important part is at the end, we're going to offer you a free initial consultation. And we'll talk about what's involved. How do you qualify for that? How can you get ready? What is the cost of planning with us and things like that? So that's our agenda. Now, who here in the room, well, no, I think you all know what an epiphany is, right? That light bulb. An epiphany is that, it's that aha moment. Probably where it's something you knew about before, but you gain a deeper insight. Something that kind of changes you. It's significant, and you won't think about something the same. I hope that many, if not all of us today, experience an aha moment about estate planning. So you end up going, wow, I can accomplish that. So in order to do that, I'm going to talk about things that aren't often covered at estate planning seminars. So I want you to kind of be brave and withhold judgment and play along here. I want you to connect deeply, not just intellectually with, oh yeah, there's wills and trusts. Reality check, we're all going to die. At some point, we all need estate planning. We're all going to have an effect on our loved ones. Some of us are going to become incapacitated. So I'm asking all of you, just for about a few minutes here, I'm going to ask you a few questions. I'm going to have you close your eyes, ask you a few questions, have you think about some things, and then I'll have you open your eyes, and then we'll move on. So go ahead, close your eyes now. You're only cheating yourself if you don't. Close your eyes, and I'm just going to ask you to think about tomorrow when you wake up in a hospital. And it's a hospital room with 2 beds, lots of medical equipment. You're connected to that machine, drip, drip, drip. Who's going to care for you? Who's going to make your health choices if you're unable? In fact, who's going to manage your assets? Now, I want you to also think about, what if you don't even make it home today? You die in a car accident or you have a stroke or something. What if you die? Are your documents organized? Do people know where they're at? Do you have the right people appointed to take care of your matters? What will be the effect on the family? So you can open your eyes now. Thank you very much. I find that helps people kind of connect. We don't like to think about these things, but my job today is to have you think about these things. This is important stuff. And like the hundreds and thousands before you that have been to this seminar, they end up educated, motivated, and inspired to do something about this. What I've done is I've started to introduce the idea of defining moments. A defining moment is something that happens in our life. It kind of changes us. It may become an emotional anchor. Think about these things, like our wedding day. In fact, I actually, 24 years ago, stayed in this very hotel. It was the Hilton back then. And my rehearsal dinner was here in a room right over there. I sang a solo to my then-to-be wife. When we like to celebrate, there's family, there's people when we do weddings, but it changes us legally, right? It's a legal status. Think of the birth, especially of children, I guess even grandchildren, the joy, the hope, there's a lot of joy with that in pictures. And with Facebook now, people share them. But for the parents, that's a legal status. Once you're a parent, you're always a parent, especially moms. Are you always a mom? Yeah, I think so. Sometimes we celebrate, the generation down below, but sometimes it's the death of a loved one. You ever been to a memorial service and you kind of had that aha moment? You go, wow, I just learned something really important about someone. I've had that happen to me. I want to tell you about my Grandma Doris. Grandma was incredibly generous, hard worker, and when I went to her memorial service, it was a room probably close to double this size. And after all of the speakers talked about her life of service and her generosity and her sense of humor and all this and that, they started to pass the microphone around. And all these people started to stand up, young folks talking about Grandma Doris. Now, I knew all my relatives. We did lots of family things, so I wondered what was going on. So I need to give you a little background. I need to tell you about breakfast at Grandma's. Breakfast at Grandma's was incredible. I mean, she lived in Chehalis, and she would get up at 5:30, start cooking the bacon and the ham and stuff like that, and we would wake up. I was the oldest of 4 in our family, my brother and I. We would go downstairs, we'd smell all that. We'd get downstairs, and there would be the bacon and sometimes ham. She loved sausage. So sausage, she had not only the patties, but she had the links. I like those links, if they're brown just right. She would ask us what kind of eggs we want. I would have had scrambled. My brother would have either poached, which is harder, or just, sunny side up. And she would start cooking those for us. But while we were waiting, of course, there was cold cereal, and she had hot cereal, and she had berries. So with her pancakes, she had blackberries that she picked at her place. She had raspberries. She even had peaches that she had canned. This was incredible. Okay, so now you get the feel. So I'm at this memorial for Grandma Doris. And all these guys started talking about Grandma Doris. Now, how many people here have heard of the STP race? Seattle to Portland, which my wife did in one day. That's 200 miles. Most people, however, stop in Centralia. Centralia is right next to Chehalis. Turns out for about a decade, Grandma Doris was taking her breakfast show on the road. She was feeding all these people. No wonder they wanted to camp there. And they appeared at her memorial. I was dumbfounded. I was amazed that her generosity was not just to descendants, it was to everyone. It's how she lived her life, and that changed me. I thought, I have to have service in my life. So anyway, that's Grandma Doris. Wanted to honor her. And she had 2 children. So this is my dad right here, and my mom and my family. So I mean, there's a whole nother, but this is just the generation. These are part of the descendants and her legacy on my dad's side. And my youngest brother, they actually have another child. So it's incredible what good planning can do. And it's a tragedy not to capture that. I'm going to tell you later how my wife's family kind of failed to capture that stuff. So at our firm, we view wealth holistically. We think that there's a lot of things. Your core values, your relationships are really, really important. And what about wisdom? My dad's got he's got a PhD in nuclear engineering. Because I went to law school after seminary, I've got more years post-secondary education than my own dad. But if you're like me, maybe you've learned more from the School of Hard Knocks, right? It's the life lessons. It's not the books I've studied that teach me who to be and how to act. It's when we face adversity. I think that if we could pass on some of our life lessons, some of our wisdom to the next generation, then we've really accomplished a lot. Now, community. A lot of us, give during our lifetimes. Many people want to give upon their death. They want to make sure, like Winston Churchill said, you make a life by what you get, but you make a living by what you get, but a life by what you give. It's a great way to save taxes. It's a great way to encourage things. And I just want to ask you about that. Many people want to include that. Maybe you want the children to give the money, though, so that they get a deduction. And then financial. To be a good estate planning attorney, I have to know what you own and how you own it. So that's a big part of the consultation. I'm going to give you a questionnaire. And when you come in, I'm going to ask, hey, is this separate? Is this community? How do you own this? I find a lot of times people kind of mess up title during lifetime. Because that way I can advise you as to avoiding court, avoiding probate, what is tax deferred, asset protection. So that's part of the estate plan. So altogether, this can help make up a good estate plan. Now, at this point in the seminar, I will have a few comments from you. What do you think is the most important ingredient of a good legacy, a good estate plan? What do you think? What are some ideas? Go ahead.
I don't know if this is...
Protection of the assets from the government and maybe from those predators and creditors. Maybe even protect it for the heirs. Right. Yeah, that's part of it.
To make it as easy a transition as
To make it as easy as possible. Yeah.
To have things you want passed on to the people that you want.
To have the things that you want to pass on to the right people. Kind of the right way, when, and how. Sure. Sometimes I've done a whiteboard, and we kind of put a bunch of ideas up here. I had a client whose father was a famous photographer, and when he divorced, he remarried, and when he died, the new spouse gave his camera to the Goodwill. Son would have paid for that, because that was Dad's legacy. That was his work. So caption those things, really important. We're going to revisit and answer this after the break, and your answer may have modified by then. Now, I've reviewed thousands of plans over the years, and I'm kind of glad that McDonald's doesn't serve up Will's along with its fries. But the first thing is poor documents. None of us like misspellings, but if the wrong phrases are in documents, it can be powerfully bad. There was a man once who had a pretty good sized estate, and he had a power of attorney for his father, who had a decent-sized estate. The power of attorney was so bad that when son died, son was taxed on everything dad owned. Why? The power of attorney was too big. And so the son was taxed on everything dad owned. It's called a power of appointment. Terrible result. Now, I'm sure that gets your attention. What about married folks? You may have language that says, I want to pass on the maximum amount tax-free. Well, guess what? If that was done in another state, if that doesn't deal with Washington, if that hasn't been changed, that can cause a $240,000 tax in our state. Because you're going to skip federal tax, but you're going to cause a state estate tax. So that's a big deal. Sometimes people have language that's too fluffy, and it wouldn't give any creditor protection. And a lot of people have documents they think will protect it from the nursing home, but it does not. Funding, no funding. I had someone call me, a gal, oldest of 8 children. She lived in Bothell, probably in her mom's house now that I think about it. Anyway, she called me and said, Mom had a living trust, so there's no probate, right? And I said, well, can I ask you a few questions? She said, yeah. I said, did Mom own a home? She said, oh yeah, she owned a home. I said, well, was it titled in the name of her trust? She said, oh no, it was in her name. Okay, I said, did she have a brokerage account? Yeah, she had a $400,000 brokerage account. Was it in her trust? No. Well, I said, guess what? This is not going to avoid probate. And with 8 kids, it was kind of a messy process. So that's lack of funding. No timely updates. How many people here have heard of a law called HIPAA? Right? Most of us have heard of that. HIPAA is the Healthcare Information Portability and Accountability Act. Well, attorneys, we all think we're fairly clever. We used to say, look, no one should have the power to make a health decision until I'm unable. I'm already at the hospital, the doctor can certify it, no problem. Well, HIPAA says that you have to give authorized consent. How can you give authorized consent the very moment you become incapacitated? You can't. So HIPAA, when it went into effect, it blew up thousands of estate plans. You might have powers of attorney right now that are worthless. I'm sad to say, but this is the honest truth. My own physician is on Mercer Island Clinic of Medicine. They have a little form that includes a power of attorney for health. It's not HIPAA compliant. I've seen hospital forms that have it wrong. The 5 wishes, a great tool for you to talk about values, but it's not HIPAA compliant. It just isn't. So I think, state tax law changes, things like that. No remarriage protection. I know we all know people that have gone through divorces. Why not have protections to deal with that very fact? And then finally, not capturing the family legacy. Like I said, my family's done a really, really good job. My wife's family did a poor job. That's why I'm more passionate than most attorneys I know about this. So I'm going to introduce a family here. This is Bill and Mary Jones. They've got an estate worth $1.2 million. They've got their home. It's paid off. They have IRAs. They've got, I guess they had a small annuity. They have a really tiny life insurance policy, probably a burial, like one of those $10,000 Gerber policies. A couple of checking savings accounts. This is enough for them. They ought to be able to retire. Now, by the way, it's always hard to come up with the size of a estate. We're here in Bellevue today. There are people probably in this room that have homes worth more than that. So whether you add or take off a zero, we all need to plan, but this is my sample family. Now, Bill and Mary had 2 children. Bill, kind of like my father-in-law, he practiced for a long time, 41 years, but he was an accountant. So he did taxes, right? Individual 1040s, 1041s. He did the corporate tax returns, kind of helped a lot of companies get up and running. He was in Seattle, then in Bellevue. His wife, Mary, trained school teacher. But as soon as the kids were in school, she was a stay-at-home mom. So a lot like my mom. Wanted to be there whenever the kids came home, feed them snacks, ask how their day was. She was the quarterback of family relations. I mean, they did family reunions, very involved, head of the PTA, one of those types. Now they had 2 children. The first was Susan, kind of a golden child. She did really, really well in life. Liked well in school, married, has a couple of kids now. Early on, she was good at numbers, started helping Dad with his CPA practice. And now she's trying to become an accountant at a big high-rise, firm in downtown Seattle. Now, how many people here have children? Are they all the same? Not so much. John here, number 2 child, he's actually been married and divorced twice. he did not make it through high school. He had drugs and alcohol and gambling. That's a combo that's pretty tough. And now with casinos everywhere, you can imagine. This is a mess. They love him, but what do? This is their family. So let's talk about their estate planning options. First option is to spend it all, right? You've seen the t-shirts, I'm spending my kids' inheritance. I never liked that. Now, I live up in Juanita, up in Kirkland. I work out at the Bellevue Club a lot. The Bellevue Club, right just down here. If you walk out of the Bellevue Club, you can see the Lexus, the Mercedes, you'll see all these fancy cars. So it's quite a contrast when I'm walking to my car and I see all these fancy cars. Then I get on 405 and I'm driving north. Traffic slows down. I see a car that, it's mispainted, it doesn't match. Turns out it's a beat up jalopy when I get close, and the bumper sticker said, "This is my children's inheritance." I thought, well, okay, that's more clever than a t-shirt. But the problem with the first one is timing, right? We don't want to outlast our money. If the last check to the underwriter can bounce, okay, I get it. Now, dying intestacy, that sounds really painful to us men, doesn't it? Dying intestate, it's a Latin term for big attorney fees. If you go to court and you didn't have a will, you got to still probate it, but you haven't said who can act. They're going to have to post a bond. So it's a hassle. And let me tell you a story to kind of bring this home. Let's say husband and wife get married, have a couple of kids, divorce. Okay, that happens a lot. Now husband, the home was his. Wife got some other things. So now he goes and he gets remarried, has a couple more kids, and he dies. He dies without a will, which is intestacy. Well, the home was his. What do you suppose the intestate statute says? Our law is going to say, well, half of that should go to his current spouse, and one half should be divided equally amongst all of his children. He's got children from 2 marriages, mom 1, mom 2. You think that's very easy? That's a hassle. So let's say she did a 10-month, $10,000 intestate probate. It's pretty common, $1,000 a month. Well, she decides, oh my gosh, I'm not going to make that error, so she does a will. She's got 3 kids. She says, I give everything equal to the 3 kids, and they start off being young and they get older and her life goes on. She decides at some point that she wants to add her son, who works at Microsoft, to her $400,000 brokerage account. Is that a good idea? How much can you gift without a problem? Used to be $10,000, now $14,000. I could write each of you a check for $14,000. It would bounce. It would bounce, but I could write the check. But if you give more than $14,000 or a couple 28, you have to file a return saying you've used part of your lifetime amount. Okay? So first of all, she's made a taxable gift. But the second real problem is, what if the son, he's an eager Seahawk fan, and he's not only got on his 12s, he's painted his hair, he's going down to a game, and he's in a hurry, and he hits a car full of lawyers. You may say that's a good start, I understand that. But they are going to sue him. They're going to develop lots of neck and back pain, right? What if they get a judgment for $100,000? They're going to collect it right from mom's account. Why? He owns it. Joint tenancy has 0 creditor protection in the state of Washington. Now, for husbands and wives in the room, if you've got a $5,000, $10,000 joint checking account, I'm not worried. But even for husbands and wives, owning brokerage accounts as joint tenants isn't always wise. It's certainly a bad idea to start adding children to your accounts. So if you want more on this, you can ask for the trouble with joint tenancy. I've written a report on that. All right, so we covered that, the will. Community property. Husband and wife throughout Washington, we're a community property state. But when husband dies, I always bump off the men first. Husband dies, it doesn't matter if they had a joint bank account and IRAs or this or that. You're going to have to probate the home. Because 98% of the time in Washington, you own real property as tenants in common. You got a dead person's name on title. So an I love you honey will does not avoid court. And by the way, probate doesn't often cover all of the assets, but to stay on point here, husband, wife, do the I love you honey will, and they were hoping they would avoid court. A community property agreement can do that. And you can't go to LegalZoom or Office Depot or anything like that and get this form. But you can hire an attorney in Washington that says, I love you, honey. We're married. Everything I have is ours together. Anything I get in the future is ours. And most importantly, when one of us dies, it all goes to the survivor with no court. That's pretty quick and easy. Might I use the word slick as an attorney? That might be really good. If you're in a first marriage, you love your spouse, maybe you don't even have kids, that could be ideal. But it gives you zero estate tax protection, it gives you zero creditor or remarriage protection, and it'll never, ever get it to the kids. So it can actually cause an estate tax problem, and it'll never get it to the kids. So you can always remarry someone younger, but it'll never get it there. So it's incomplete. So, it may confuse you a little bit. I'm happy to talk about community property and how that can be a part of the plan. But that's one of your other options in Washington. Now, a bare bones trust, I gave you the example of an unfunded trust, right? It didn't avoid probate at all. What if it completely avoids probate? But if it's bare bones, it just gives it outright to the kids, and then one of them gets in a car accident, the other goes through a divorce. There's no protection for the next generation. Kind of that was one of the goals. So now we're going to talk a lot about what is a family wealth trust after our break. So congratulations, that was our longest slide. You did great. Very good. Back to our family. So we got Bill and Mary. He's ready to retire after 41 years of doing accounting. Yeah, he's ready to retire. She wants him to start volunteering because she's been doing that on her own. They have been planning their vacation. They ought to do a will or plan their funeral, but let's get real. Now, he's put on a few pounds over the years, especially during tax season. Do guys like to see doctors? No. Nah, not so much. Yeah. He hasn't seen a doctor in close to 8 years. So he gets up one day and he skips breakfast. He thinks he's being so good, but he passed about 2 McDonald's and like 8 Starbucks on the way to where he was going to go jog. So he picked up a little something he shouldn't have. He starts jogging. Where do you suppose he wakes up? 911, he was, carted to the hospital. You pick your hospital of choice. It scared the bejeebies out of them. Very, very scary. He didn't die, but once he got home, where do you suppose making a will on that honey-do list went? Straight to the top. Honey, we're going to get a will. How are they going to choose an attorney? Do they go to the phone book? No one does that anymore. Now remember, their son had been through 2 divorces and a couple of DUIs, etc. So they called the attorney. Do you do wills? Oh yeah, I've been to law school. No problem. I can do a will. What do you want to say? Look, I almost died. I want everything to go to my wife and vice versa. And we don't know what to do about John. Let's put Susan in charge. But what do we care? We're gone. So they do a simple will. And they feel great. Feel really good about it. Until about 6 months later, something terrible happens to Bill. What do you suppose happens to Bill? He dies. You think he's died. It's worse than that. He didn't die. He had a stroke. He became incapacitated, unable to handle his own affairs. This time it was serious. So this is a good time to kind of sidestep and talk about long-term care, right? In-home, we always start in-home. No one wants to leave their home, and we can bring in help. In fact, you can actually go to adult daycare where you drop someone off and then the caregivers get a break. That's kind of nice too. I used to be on the board of EADS, which is here on the east side, Elder Adult Daycare Center. Assisted living, right? And like I said, they have like 6-bed facilities, so they're springing up all over the place. And then there's the large skilled nursing home, that dreaded skilled nursing home. Well, these things aren't free. There's really only 5 ways to cover this. First is use your cash. They want it cash on a barrelhead. You can charge it, but you don't get a payment plan. You're going to have to start paying Visa and MasterCard, you're 18% or something. So they want to be paid. And sometimes you sign contracts saying you can't qualify for Medicaid for 5 years. It's kind of crazy. You got to be careful before you sign these deals. Now, some people have already bought long-term care insurance. But some people don't qualify, and guess what? It can be expensive. I've heard that, right? Okay, and sometimes they raise the rates. So that may or may not work for you. Medicare. Sometimes people tell me, Steve, I got Medicare, so I don't need planning, right? Well, yeah, you're over 65, this and that. Guess in Bill's case, would Medicare cover the cost of long-term care? No. I tell you, if you did everything right, it might cover a limited period. If he saw the right doctors and they certified things and they said you have to go straight to a skilled nursing home, and if he's learning to walk, he's learning to speak, he's rehabilitating, and they dot all the I's and cross all the T's, Medicare may pay for days, weeks, even up to 100 days max. It will not pay the long-term care cost though. And what if he was at the hospital, he went home, and then he fell. Then he went to the skilled nursing home, Medicare would pay 0. Okay, so this is not a long-term care plan. So that leaves us with Medicaid. Medicaid for a single person, I've got a client this month, and you know, she's got like $12,000. She's got to get down to $2,000 before she qualifies for Medicaid. It's crazy. Now, a married couple, they can exclude their home, which kind of means they can delay it, right? And they can qualify with a larger bit of money, but it's welfare, it's public, right? Bill Gates shouldn't be able to qualify for Medicaid. I mean, a lot of people, again, there's a lot of in between, but it's hard to get to that point, and we'll tell you about that. And then VA aid and attendance. So if you've served in the military during a period of war, you're honorably discharged, then you yourself, when you need help with activities of daily living, can qualify for this long-term care benefit. You don't have to pay for it. And so can a widow of a veteran. And so I've got a report on that. I'm trained, I could talk about that. But you got to be careful because that VA will carry you for a while, but Medicaid ultimately would cover more costs. So let's make this real. Let's go across the street from Bill and Mary to meet Ralph and Ruth. It's real easy. Ralph, Ruth, their two kids, Rachel, Ryan, and even their dog, Rover. So with their situation, something happened to Ruth. And of course, what Ralph did is he did the care at home until he couldn't handle it. And then he finally had to admit her to a nursing home where she stayed for 37 months. She did not get better. Well, they spent through all their savings, right? They blew through everything. It was over $7,000 a month. that's average. I've got clients they were spending $15,000 a month till they hired us. We got husband on Medicaid. We were able to do some things with the home and actually completely exclude it, and now it's been sold and the kids have the money, so we've really helped that family. Well, when they lost all their assets, my gosh, they qualified for Medicaid. But they didn't do it right, and so at least the last 10 months were covered. And by the way, this is not a 2-month problem. 2.4 years is the national average. That's almost 2.5 years. Studies say 2 out of 3 of us are going to need some period of care longer than a 3-month period. That's pretty frightening. Well, this bankrupted their estate. They weren't planning this. They lost everything. They've got his Social Security, nothing left to pass on to the kids. And they didn't do it right with the home. So when Ralph dies, they're going to put a lien on the home. There's not going to be any equity left. What a mess. That's a big mess. So what's a possible solution? Many people are worried about long-term care and the raising rates, and it happens a lot. So what if you got some money sitting around like in a CD? You got $200,000 sitting around a CD, it's earning 1%, and it's taxable. Let's just give you an example. Let's say this couple, they take that $200,000 and they throw it into a single premium life insurance policy. And it's probably a second to die policy. So even if you're not both wonderfully healthy, often you qualify for this. You can buy $390,000 worth of life insurance. To have a CD do that, it'd take 81 years of a doubling effect, the rule of 72. So this is it's a nice solution. And then it has a rider, so if either spouse needs long-term care, it'll pay up to $7,800 a month. That's more than the cost of the average cost of care. If they never tap into that, then there's going to be the full death benefit for the children when they die. There's even the ability to kind of get a repayment of premium for other things, right? So the point is, and they can't raise the rates on you. So this is a solution that can fit for families. I've worked with lots of insurance people over the years, and I've seen some good and bad. So if you want a second opinion, you want to talk about this, I'll introduce you to some people. I just want to give you a possible solution. So now, we're back now to Bill and Mary. We've got Bill had the stroke. We're back to our primary story. So he is unable to manage things, right? It's pretty serious incapacity. So we have to do a guardianship or a living probate. Now, Groucho Marx had a big battle, hundreds of thousands of dollars with trust companies fighting the living girlfriend, all that. This is Ma and Pa Jones. But still, this is not easy. It's humiliating. You think the judge is going to rubber stamp and say, Mary, you have all authority. She could title everything in her name and divorce him. We don't know, so you have to go to court. It's humiliating. Court's in control. They appoint a guardian ad litem, someone that will investigate. And they have subpoena power. They'll interview the doctors and nurses and the medical records. They'll go to the family home. They'll talk to the kids. John's a bum. He's still living at home with his mom. They interview all these people, and then they report back to the court. And they usually charge about $3,000 for their report, and then there's the attorney, so $5,000 to $10,000, $12,000, common. In this case, Mary was appointed. Guardian of the person, guardian of the estate, But now all the money's in a blocked account and she has to report to the court annually. What a drag. The will didn't help them with any of this. So now Bill dies. Okay, we have a will, so now we get to do, from a living probate, we go to a death probate. Probate's a Latin word that means to prove. Prove who died. Was there a valid last will and testament? Because remember, there's probate without a will. That's intestacy. Now we have a testate estate. So, but it's expensive. You saw a lot of the famous estate slides, right? You saw people, the cost of probate administration and taxes and what all. The average time is 1 to 3 years in Washington. One of my very best friends, he's in his 15th year of a probate in our state. It's in the Tri-Cities where I grew up. His sister's the PR and she is sitting on her behind. And it's not good. But normally it's, 1 to 3 years. It is open to the public, so you can go down. In fact, there are people at the courthouse with laptops and they're just writing things down. Why? Because they are sending notices to the heirs. They want to, get a tip and sell the home. Remember we talked about who's most affected? The predators. I mean, when someone dies and it's public, all of a sudden there's notices and people want to manage the money and they want to sell this and do that. It's happening. And the fees, 5 to 15 grand is pretty common. I've charged over 30,000 for a probate, and for my own relatives, I've charged, under 5. But there's a time and cost and hassle. And by the way, the biggest fee is not just the attorney fee, but the personal rep could charge up to 1%, because that's what a professional fiduciary would charge. What about Bill's legacy? We've been talking, nuts and bolts, money, taxes. What about his legacy as a father, a grandfather, even some of the kind of unique businesses he was involved in and work? I think all those stories are lost. Well, you remember their good neighbor Ralph, who lost his wife. He always had a crush on Mary. And after Bill died, he was a shoulder to cry on. He was there with a cup of coffee the very next day. Well, this turned into more than a cup of coffee. This was, a little wine, a little this, a little that. Pretty soon they're an item. And he wants to get remarried. Well, Bill gave everything outright to Mary. He absolutely did not protect her from anyone else. So what if the first thing after they get married is they sign a community property agreement? That means the survivor gets it all. What if Ralph says, why would you give that money to your kids? John's a bum. He doesn't need it. Susan makes more than you. You should give it to these two. Now, these are my daughters. So, the point is, it could all of a sudden estate plans change. You ever seen that? Someone remarries and all of a sudden the whole plan changes. Since we got the Super Bowl tomorrow, there was once I was giving a seminar at a church in Puyallup, and there was a retired pastor from Phoenix that said he sees this all the time where remarriage just completely implodes the plan. So Bill didn't protect against that. What if remarriage doesn't blow things up? What if it's something else? What if Mary is driving down the road and she's got her first cell phone and she's not on it, but she hears it go off and she's kind of looking for it and she just hits another car? Well, she can be sued, right? Hopefully she didn't hit a school bus or something like that. There's zero creditor protection. Bill could have protected her, he didn't. Or what if she needs to go in for nursing home care? It can all be lost and used. So this is a tragedy. Well, let's bring her back smiling. Why is she smiling? She's got the whole estate, all right? Now, surviving spouses live an average of 7 years. Now, these are just averages. I hope no one here is at the 6.5 year stage. Now, monies don't always go up, but if you look back 10 years ago, I bet your home is worth more now than it was then. So I used the rule of 72 and I said, look, it could double in 10 years. If you've not been crazy spenders and all of a sudden one spouse is gone, actually the expenses go down. So sometimes the estate goes up. You would think with a doubling effect here, she should be able to go on a cruise. She should be able to start funding the grandkids' education. But what if she did not age well? What if she got Alzheimer's, right? That's the big dreaded thing. None of us want that. We do crosswords just to avoid it, right? She ends up in a nursing home. Who's going to handle her affairs? Does anyone here vote for John? Now, right by my street, there's a Value Village. What if John goes to Value Village, he picks up a sport jacket, and he goes to court and says, Mom always loved me most. Susan and her fought all the time. She's too busy. I should be the one. I'm in the service industry. I'm living at home. I'm the one. Who's the judge going to believe? Nobody. Now you know what a guardianship is. This time with brother and sister fighting, it's going to be more expensive. They're each going to lawyer up. But think of the irreparable harm between brother and sister. They're never going to be the same. What a tragedy. All right, so now Mary passes, so we do another probate. And by the way, frequently it costs more the next round. I can't guarantee the fees. The fees in Washington or whatever is deemed reasonable. And it's probate judges that approve the fees. Okay, so talking about conflict of interest and Roger Goodell. Anyway, and the reason for that is on first death, you've got a lot of joint ownership or the IRAs or things like that. When you're going down a generation, it's likely that more of the total estate will pass through the court process. So that's a range of fees I see commonly. That's a pretty big hassle. And what about the taxes? Okay, we talked a little bit before the seminar about the federal and the state taxes. Let me summarize here. The estate grew, it doubled. So the estate was $2.4 million when Mary died. The federal exemption this year is $5,430,000. That's a pretty handsome sum. So is there any federal estate taxes due? No, nothing, zero. But the state amount is only $2,012,000. So we have $400,000 subject to Washington state estate taxes. Well, you start at 10%. That's 40 grand, due 9 months from the date of death to the state of Washington. For a married couple with a larger estate, that could be, like I said, it could be $240,000. It could be a big, big sum. Because the Washington state ranges from 10 to 20% is the Washington state tax rate. And the federal rate's at 40. All right. With nursing home costs, it depends on how many months. But there's significant costs there at $7,000 a month. If there was 2 probates and 2 guardianships, it's pretty likely this would be a higher number. But look at this family. That's a huge impact. $375,000 is a huge cost. And that happens. Not a lot, but that can happen with poor planning. So now let's talk about her legacy. I mean, is all that she stood for as a grandma, is that going to be lost? Is this like Grandma Glenna? When Grandma Glenna died, she said her favorite place in the whole world was Sun Valley. So we have her name on a park bench right there. We get there twice a year. When both my wife's parents died, she inherited a place up at Birch Bay, and that had their furniture, their design, but we sold that. It's kind of hard to own 2 homes with a young family. So we bought part of a condo in Sun Valley. There's none of their pictures, there's none of their things, none of their furniture, so we could see this park bench maybe once every other year. That's not much of a legacy. That's really sad. My parents have done videos, told stories, family reunions. They've captured all sorts of ways to protect legacy. Mary didn't do that. Bill and Mary didn't. That's a tragedy. So now what about the kids? Let's talk about the kids, then we'll take a little break. Are they ready to get their $700,000 and change? Remember, there's a lot of costs. Most clients are worried someone's going to take financial advantage, go after the heirs. Well, I told you Susan's married. I just didn't tell you she was married to a no-good stay-at-home bum named Jason. Jason's good at drinking beer. He'll be good for the Super Bowl tomorrow. But he's a decent dad, but he's not a good husband, and he's not good with money. And what if he files for divorce after Susan gets her inheritance? Well, they could have already done a simple I love you honey plan and maybe said that everything they inherit is community. But here's the kicker. All property, even if Susan did everything right, she kept the account as her inheritance. It's in a separate account in her name alone. In Washington state, in a divorce proceeding, all assets are in front of the judge, separate and community. And if he ends up being the custodial parent, he could get half. He could get more than half. Well, that would make Bill and Mary roll over in their grave. If that could happen to the good kid, what do you suppose could happen to John? Can you spell Corvette? He's going to buy a muscle car, but more important, he's going to fly to Vegas, or he'll just go to Tulalip or something like that. He'll go to one of the local casinos. It won't take him but a couple of weekends to blow through that money. What a tragedy. Not a good thing. So there's got to be a better alternative.